Welcome to another edition of the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show, where this week we are super excited to have the brand new football coach at Mountain Pointe High School, been a powerhouse and certainly done some great things throughout the years. Jon Roberts, the new head coach at Mountain Pointe High School, also did an outstanding job turning around the program at Vista Grande. We're going to talk about a lot of different subjects with Coach today. We're going to talk a little offense, a little defense, a little program building. We're going to try to get into it all there. Super excited to talk to him. I've seen his teams up and close, and they play a tremendous brand of football, always very physical. And like I said, he has a ton of knowledge and many different facets of the game. So we're excited to share with him and learn from him tonight. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But before we do, I want to take just a second to remind everybody that the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show is brought to you by School Funder. School Funder, the only online fundraising company in America that lets you keep all of the money your team raises, minus the small 3% processing fee. Sound too good to be true? I can tell you that it is, in fact, true, because we used School Funder last year. In a few short weeks, we were able to raise upwards of $12,000 with our lift-a-thon, and we kept all of that minus the small 3% processing fee. Many other companies would take away upwards of $200 to $2,500 worth of that money. You wouldn't give away 20% of the wins your team earns, so why give away 20% of their profits that they earn that can go to helping your program? So please, I encourage you to go to School Funder. That's SCHOOLFUNDR.org, and let them know the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show sent you. And while you're doing that, take a moment. Please, please, please like and subscribe the show. It helps us get to more people, helps us get to more coaches, and have the ability to share more free coaching content, which is the all-around goal of this show, is to just better the coaching community. I feel very blessed to have been able to coach for many years, and if there's anything that we can do to help any guys starting out or help even some veteran guys learn some stuff, because that's the great part about football is you can learn every single day, and you could live a whole lot of lifetimes and not know even close to everything there is to learn about this game. So I would encourage you to like and subscribe, follow us, all that stuff. We're also on Twitter, at Blue and Gold Gridiron Show. So please, please, please do that. But like I said, super excited to have Coach on the show. We're going to talk a lot of different things. But first, Coach, I want you to take just a moment and tell us a little bit about your football story.
Thank you, Coach, for having me on. My story started off a little bit after, I think it was 2009. Got invited to coach my cousin Keon Graves. He had a team at the time called the Titans. He invited me to come out for a youth camp and help him run a youth camp to help with his club team that he was building around his son. The bug kind of bit me there. We kind of merged in the youth circuit. It was the East Valley, Kyrene, Desert Vista, Mountain Pointe, Ahwatukee area. We built our team there, right off of the south side of Phoenix and Baseline Road. We built our team, and then we merged into a track club called the Arizona Flames. We started doing that. On that Flames team, we ended up now we just realized we're pretty close to having our first NFL kid, but we had about 25 kids off of that youth program that we ran from 2009 to 2014 that have gotten Division I scholarships at the Power 5 level. I leveraged that into becoming an offensive coordinator in 2014 under Coach Tracy Stewart at the time in Vista Grande. During that season, we kind of doubled our offensive production. We went from, I think they went from scoring a little over 100 points that season to we ended up getting in the high 300s, almost 400 points that year. Ended up going 7-4 that season and had the first playoff berth in our school's history, and Vista Grande's history at the time. And then from there, I ended up working with Coach Conrad for a brief of Hamilton for like 2 weeks, and then leveraged that into a situation with Coach Lewis at Chaparral. Coach Thomas Lewis, worked with him for about a year and a half. Kind of learned how a bigger program is raised and raises funds and utilizes the booster club and has the big time offices with 3 different sets of uniforms and helmets. Learned a lot about how to, run a program under him. I was his assistant quarterbacks coach on the varsity, and I was an offensive analyst for him. And then from there on, I got a call from Tim Hernandez, who's now with Coach Lar. He was at the previous Mountain Pointe staff, and now he's with Coach Lar at the Corona del Sol staff. We knew each other from our time working with the youth at the Flames, Arizona Flames, and he got me in contact with Coach Paul Morrow, and then I became Coach Morrow, the late Coach Morrow. I was his offensive coordinator and assistant head coach for his last couple years. And then from there, Coach Morrow was instrumental because I really got a chance to learn how to create consistency within a program. I don't know if his record's been beat, but he won 13 state football championships in this state. I consider him a legend. I think other coaches that knew him do. I leveraged that into working with Rashard Davis at Santa Cruz High School, and we ended up going to the state semifinals. In 2019, we lost to Round Valley. And then the following year, we ended up playing Benson in the state championship and won the state 2A state championship in 2020. He became the first African-American head coach to win a state championship in the state. And then the Vista Grande job opened up, and I really at the time wasn't going to apply for it. But Richard, we went to lunch, and he convinced me to put in for it. I think he knew at the time that he was getting ready to move back to Alabama, and he ended up moving back to Alabama, and I put in for Vista, and then I ended up getting the Vista job. And so for the last 4 years, I was lucky enough to kind of retain the staff from my first Vista Grande stint, and we ended up turning that program around. We started off with 13 kids at our first meeting, and we grew it up to, upwards of 100 and I think it was 125 kids on average to start the season, which I think is pretty good for a 4A school. We've had 4 straight years of winning. Started off 5-4. Second year was 7-4. Third year was 7-3, and last year was either 7-3 or 8-3, depending on what you saw. And so it's just been a heck of a journey. I've been a lot of different places, but I've been blessed to learn under a lot of good quality coaches, whether it was head coaches or assistant coaches that I worked along with on the staff.
Which I'll tell you, you did definitely. That's quite a journey, and I didn't realize that you'd worked for Coach Morrow and Coach Davis. Both those guys, outstanding football coaches, championship football coaches. So got to kind of cut your teeth under guys that are really highly successful and highly respected in Arizona and across the country. I knew Coach Davis had ended up back in Alabama, and like I said, didn't know you worked for Coach Morrow, but really was watching with a lot of admiration at how you guys were able to turn Vista Grande around and did some outstanding things there. Before we talk a little offense, defense, scheme stuff, maybe even a little practice philosophy, when you're establishing a program, maybe, what do you think are the most important factors that you have to do in building a program? Obviously, taking a program from 13 kids showing up to upwards of 120 when you begin a season is really tremendous, and those are outstanding 4A numbers. What do you think are some of the most important factors in being able to establish a program and rebuild a program? Because you certainly have been able to do that.
I think you have to come in with a vision. I think that's the first thing you got to do. I think everybody does when they come into a situation like that one, but you're going to have to establish needs, and you're going to have to be able to segment and compartmentalize those needs and be willing to go through, I think, the what it's going to take to get those needs in a certain order. And so what I mean by that is, like, first year, I just needed, for my guys to be able to win a couple games. I needed them to be able to, my seniors had never won a homecoming game, let alone even had a chance at playoffs. My first year, the seniors, we only had, I think, 6 of them at the time. They had gotten beat on average from, 35, 40 points or more. And so what we did was, we kind of simplified it. We didn't come offensively with any extravagant schemes. We had a couple athletes and we sat them down, and I just kind of took the playbook that I had from Coach Davis, and we went shotgun single wing, and we just tried to run everybody over. And we ended up being one of the top rushing offenses in the entire state, but we really couldn't throw the ball consistently because we just had to start from scratch. So we really played a really fundamental style of football. There was times where we didn't even get in the wishbone sometimes just to get some run generation off. Second thing I would say is you got to have a staff that's willing to go through the process of a turnaround. A lot of times, and I'm seeing it even now, there's a lot of coaches that want to be attached to big name programs, and there's not a lot of coaches that I have found that really are going to want to be around in the process of a turnaround. They might think they do, but when they realize that you're not just, trying to get the top athletes or develop them athletically, a lot of it is culture building as well, because winning is a culture, I believe. And so, I was blessed that I had a good core of coaches from that 2014, 2015 year, at Vista, that wanted to come back because we knew what we could do when we had an administration that would support us. And so, I learned that with Morrow too, that if you don't have an administration that's going to support you, you're basically out there running practices for nothing. And so, my first year, we ended up getting, support from our admin. The second year, we ended up getting a little more. And then the third year, when we missed the playoffs by one ranking, that's when I was able to, because I had established some tradition of us winning. I was able to really, really go out in the community and get some support, as well as, the administration being able to, help us fund some jerseys. That last year we went to California twice. We went for camp, and then we went to St. Joseph's and Santa Maria, California, and they were one of the top teams in that Central CIF, and we ended up beating them by 2 points over there. And that was a first in Pinal County history for a team to leave to go to California to compete. So, it just was a process. And so I didn't, I was fortunate, and I know that now that I'm in the Valley, that I was fortunate, because a lot of things that you'll find out, and I know you're in the know too, Coach, is like at the top, some of the top programs in the Valley, there's a high amount of turnover. They'll go through 3 or 4, maybe possibly 5 coaches year after year after year. It doesn't really affect them because they have high numbers and they have a high amount of interest in the program. But you do that to a team like what I had in a small community, in which we were the second tier high school as far as what people in the community considered us. Everybody, if you come to Casa Grande one day, we'll go get some Mexican food and we'll hang out, and you'll see, man, it's blue and gold all up and down the city. And so it took me about 3 to 4 years, but now you started to see, and you see Vista Grande banners. You'll see the jerseys up in our local sports bars, and there's a sense of pride. But for when I first got there, I had a lot of people asking me why I was coaching at Vista, because of the fact that I was a star quarterback in high school for Casa Grande Union as well. So they were looking at me like, what are you doing? So, it was just an overall process, but I just believe that the main thing you got to do is you gotta compartmentalize your needs. You got to put them in an order in which you can attain them, and you got to have a coaching staff that's willing to go through that process, because a lot of guys don't want to do it, especially if they had a taste of the more winning programs. It's a lot of work.
It's a really interesting point you bring up there, Coach, because Coach Brusso, who's normally on with us, was an assistant at Casa Grande, and he's talked about that. And for any of you that aren't familiar, Casa Grande is 100 years. How long have they been playing? They've been playing football for quite a long time. And Vista
Years,
Grande
it's one of the older high schools in the state, and so it has a 100-year plus tradition. And so to come in and to have to do that, there was a huge political process that I had to go through too. That I had to, for a while, man. We had to put that rivalry game, to the side for a couple of years, because my first year that we had a winning season was also the same year that Coach Barrow, he did a heck of a job, and they won the state championship with that team led by Angel Flores. So they ended up winning that 4A state title over Poston Butte with Coach Dane. So, it was a journey. And so, now, the under Coach Dawson, I believe that, both programs are strong enough, now to where the rivalry could actually be real and actually be competitive. But, for at least a period of 7 to 8 years under Coach Barrow, other than that first time when I was the offensive coordinator, it was, it was blowouts, man. When Vista would play Union, it was blowouts, man, of upwards of the 50 to, sometimes upwards of 60 points.
Well, Coach, like I said, I really admired the turnaround you guys were able to establish there. Let me ask you, what are some of the things you've noticed in taking over? Coach Lower, was up here a few times at camp, and I was always impressed with his teams at Mountain Pointe as well. What have you? What are obviously there are big differences kind of on where the programs are at when you took over. But one of the things I thought was remarkable about Mountain Pointe is they've been able to maintain a fairly level of success while also losing a number of students. I know that's not exactly a growing area in Tempe, but what are the biggest differences you've noticed in taking over at Vista Grande, and now you're beginning that process now at Mountain Pointe?
I want to make sure what I say is AIA compliant, so I'm going to say it. A lot of teams now, now that Coach Mons is over at ASU and he's the tight end coach, a lot of them are following his model. See, I believe Coach Mons and that staff that he had at Saguaro, they figured out that if you have a population base of at least 4.5 million and you have coaches that are out in the community and have connections to the youth teams and organizations, if you invite these kids to your camps and you continuously put out a good product, that you could have a school of 1,400 kids, you know what I mean? And you could compete for state championships. When I was at Marcos Deniza, it was a telling sign when I had kids that were living in the Lakeshore Tempe area and we're playing across a team that looked like almost a junior college team, and you had corners that were 6'2", you know what I mean? And 175 pounds and ran like baby deers. And you're wondering how they're getting that type of production off of 1,400 students. Well, when you got access to kids, you know what I mean? Especially in those age ranges of 6th to 8th grade, you could start to generate something. And I think when Mons caught on to that, the AIA wasn't ready for it. And so they had to have an answer for that. And they created the Open. Well, as coaches, man, once we see something that's working, we kind of all take our version of it. I think you see that at Mountain Pointe. So Mountain Pointe, even though the student population is dipping because of the name and because of the connections that I believe Coach Lar has, and you also got to give a lot of credit to Aaron Frano, that AD over there. They've had the ability to maintain, Division I high quality guys. And even though the record may not have showed it, they're still getting guys in college at a high level. If you look at for a while, Mountain Pointe was probably putting out a top running back for the last 5 years, with the last one being Christian Clark, who's probably slated to start. When I talked to Coach Flood about Aaron Thomas, my current left tackle, about him, they said he's in line to possibly start there. So, in the Valley, it's different because you can draw with the open enrollment. You can draw upon the entire school. I mean, the entire city. And so, yeah, population matters, but if you do it right, it doesn't. And so, whereas in Casa Grande, if I lost 3 or 4 kids, and I'm being honest, it would cripple me for my season. And so, a lot of the smaller towns, they don't have access, I believe, to draw from a population base. When I walked in there, I was amazed at Mountain Pointe. We have kids that have been going to Mountain Pointe since their freshman year, and they're driving as far as Avondale and the 303 just to come to high school. That's something that you wouldn't be able to have at my current school because of the fact that we bus a lot of kids in from the outside. Some of them are from Indian reservations, and as far as Red Rock, and you wouldn't see that level of dedication to go to a high school just to play football, and you see it up in the Valley a lot.
That is an interesting point, and I'll be the first to admit that's one of the reasons I'm in Prescott. Kids pretty much know from the time they're little kids if they're going to be a Badger, they're going to be a Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I miss a little bit. But Arizona's an open enrollment state, so Arizona, that kind of element is huge in the Valley, and I understand that, and that's certainly the realities of building a program in the Valley. The one year I was at Poston Butte, it was kind of apparent that was going to be a reality of that. And that's something where I said, well, I think I'm going to go coach this Northern Arizona football, and we'll coach who kind of walks through the door and those type of things. But it's interesting that you talk about that. And I have talked to a lot of coaches about this. I could go be an assistant, wouldn't really phase me. I could coach in any system. We're going to talk about some of the stuff you guys did with your RPOs and different things like that from both an offensive and defensive perspective. But the biggest thing that I would struggle with is not being in charge of the practice plan. So walk us through a typical practice plan as the head coach that you've implemented. And another question I find fascinating is are you going to implement the same type of practice plan you had at Vista Grande, or is there going to be a different plan with maybe a few more athletes in Mountain Pointe?
Yeah, I've had to, well, because we had good numbers at the 4A, we still had to split up. We had a quite a considerable amount of two-way kids. So we had to, divide our practice. Yeah, we kept it tempo. We did the standard, dynamic stretching in the beginning, preceded by maybe a 15-minute, pre-practice period where we're going to work on some offense, some quick screen stuff, maybe some RPOs, some mesh. We'll go into a dynamic stretch. After that, we either will have a competition period followed by a special team period, and then we go right into defense for an hour. And then that would be segmented based upon need by my D coordinator. We discuss all that on a Saturday afternoon and followed by a Sunday meeting, either in person or by Zoom. And then after they would get done, it would be a standard indie period, a standard teach period, whether we're teaching front, we're teaching a new blitz, maybe a new stunt, ET stunt, or anything like that, et cetera. And then we roll into a team period. It would be we do our offense the last hour because I lean offense. I've been an offensive coordinator for 10 years plus. And so, I lean offense, and, I always like to do offense the last hour because if I need a little extra time on team, I'm going to take it. Whereas in defense, if you get some stops, man, on our scout team, it's kind of ready to go. It gives me a little bit more time to take for team if I need it. As of now at Mountain Pointe, because our numbers are higher, we have 3 levels. We can legitimately split it up half and half. We kind of know we got maybe 2 to 3 kids that will legitimately play both ways. But, other than that, we primarily have a lot of one-way guys, which, to tell you the truth, I'm being honest, kind of freaked me out because I'm not used to that. Coming from 2A where your core of your team is going to go, both ways. And then you jump into 4A where you're going to have at least 8 of those guys, maybe 6 to 8 of those guys to go in. And we only have 3 guys in the entire program that we're going to probably need to go both ways. That was different. And so now it increases, that standard model that I was doing. Now I can do that for 2 hours. And so it turns into more of a collegiate type of practice plan for me. Another thing is that up in the Valley, because, in the Tempe Union High School district, they outlet their trainers through the local hospital company. So we're Tempe Union High School district is outfitted through Banner. And so Banner does all of our trainers. So right now we're currently trying to get our schedules together because the majority of the district, with the exception of one school in Tempe Union High School district, wants to go in the morning. That's another big thing that Mons did at Saguaro. I got to give credit where credit's due. It's caught on. And another reason why I think that's good for us right now at Mountain Pointe to go into the morning, and that would be, maybe a 5:30 to 7:30 or maybe a 6 a.m. to 8:30 because our first period is football weight training. Another reason why that's good is because you always beat the heat index here up in Phoenix. So, if that heat index hits a certain metric, they won't allow you to practice until it dips. So it's almost impossible when you get in August and, in your season, it doesn't cool off till playoffs. So sometimes practice, if you want to go at 3:30, depending on the training staff, if it hits a certain heat index, you might be delayed for a couple hours a day.
That's really interesting. That's something that I've seen a lot of Texas schools did, and I've always been interested in that element of it. I think that's fascinating. And number one, the safety of the kids, because that heat is no joke in the Valley. That's another thing that I love being up in Prescott for. Don't get me wrong. our August practices are warm, but there's a big difference in 92, 93, and 110.
No,
And
no, exactly, exactly. No, you guys have great weather, man. Like it was when we played each other in the playoffs, man. We're over there, our fans are freezing, and we still had some of your fans. I see it in shorts, man. I was like, oh my god. It was great though, man. That was a great experience, a great ball game, man.
you know
Absolutely.
what? Interesting thing is we went to Snowflake the next week, and I think our guys were maybe a little cold
Oh yeah.
because it's even cooler in Snowflake.
No,
You get up there a
absolutely.
ways, but uh, enjoyed talking about that. Really enjoyed the differences there, coaching in different programs and different numbers and facilities and your resources and things and how you go about practicing. Because I like to think that we have a little something for everything and try to talk to everybody. Such a vast experience there, going from 2A to 4A to 6A to all those things, and being able to put a good product on the field. Coach, next thing I'm going to ask you about, you guys, I think, may have had enough success against us in 23 to run an RPO clinic on us. So, talk to us a little bit about your RPO game because I'll be totally honest with you, that's an area that I have not particularly coached very well. And I don't want to say given up on, but we've started to we go almost exclusively quick game now because we haven't been as good at the RPO game. How do you teach it? How do you drill it? What are some of your favorite RPOs? Walk us through that because you guys have certainly had great success with that.
Well, I like to, I come offensively, it, regardless of the system. I believe that you throw to score and you run to win, and so I want to establish some run game so that we can control the tempo of the game. And then we want to throw to score. We might this year we threw more quick screens than I probably have in my entire career, except for when I was at Marcos, where I had the wide receivers that could do it. Um, we were a power read type system for the last couple of years under Daniel Ramirez and myself. One of the philosophies that we also believed is that if we can't block you, we'll double team you. If we can't double team you, we'll option you. And so a lot of times, man, if we play teams that had really good defensive linemen, man, we'll try to double team them, whether it's a traditional inside zone or if we had, a running back that could read that linebacker like Fernando Moya, we'll use a lot of duo up there. We incorporated some of our outside pin and pull type schemes. We did counter, but we didn't have the until my last year, but he was young. Brady Mendoza, I think he's going to be phenomenal still. We didn't do a lot of GT counter. We did a lot of GH or what I like to call guard back counter. We did a lot of that. Now, as far as how we did our RPOs, I tried to instill quick concepts where regardless of whether you're just running it purely without a run or you're attaching a run to your quick game or vice versa, they're going to read one guy, and that's alley defender. And so as soon as I was able to simplify it to where I was able to show them through drills, if the guy goes here, you go there, teach them how to properly count the box and how to determine, which is pretty simple. If you got somebody over the center, it's more likely going to be an odd front. If you got two tackles over some shades of our guards, it's more likely an even. You got to go and take the time to teach them that. We had two kids. We had one kid who's in our top 5 of our class, Brendan Hunt. He's going to play quarterback at Lewis and Clark. But then we had a transfer in a Tornagant, and he was, exceptionally smart as well. And he's going to play junior college baseball in California. So I was lucky to have two quarterbacks that really, really grasped that. We were only reading one man type concept. And so there'd be sometimes, man, we would combine, we'd call it a 2-ball, where we would have a 9-on-7 drill, but we'd have maybe our outside receivers in a twins package or a trips look, and we'd blow the whistle. One quarterback, he'd give the dive into the 9-on-7. Second whistle would read alley defender, and he'd throw the route package off of that. And so, you do that, and then you bring it together. And a lot of times, man, you're trying to incorporate drills that will accent, what you're trying to teach in the game, but also slow the game down for the quarterback. You only got so much time, in high school to teach quarterbacks unless they're extremely, extremely dedicated. You know what I mean? And so we didn't invent the wheel. We just did what worked for us. And so, you know, we might have a couple bash reads on the backside for ends, but the majority of the time, as you've seen, we're trying to lock that backside in so that we can get to that outside backer or safety or hybrid type alley defender so we can manipulate him a little bit. Also, what we did as well is that we installed some veer and we installed some midline, whether it was traditional midline or inverted, as well as with inverted veer. And what we did with that was, we used that to set up the trap. So as soon as we got a D lineman to kind of shuffle his feet and stall, then you knew trap was coming, and we were trying to get an ear hole shot on that guy to try to bust long runs. And so, that was our main focus, I think, offensively. And that's why we were, the last couple of years, man, we got pretty close to a 55-45 or a 50-50 balance on our offense.
Yeah, you guys were very, very difficult to defend because of that. And obviously, interesting thing you talk about there with the trap, because I think that's so complimentary. You guys were one of the better power teams that I saw in all of 4A last year. You guys ran power so well. And particularly if you're an even front team, that guy's getting doubled, getting doubled, getting doubled. Then all of a sudden he's not getting blocked and he comes up the field. It's really can be a good complement to that, I think, in terms of what you're trying to attack there. So, you talked a little bit about your kind of how you go about doing the RPOs and things. Another thing that I always noticed about playing your teams, coaches, formationally, very, very difficult. Run a lot of different sets. We're able to create some numbers advantages with formations. So, what are you looking for when you're game planning? How do you attack formationally, and what are you trying to see that gives you an advantage from a formational perspective?
From a formational perspective, offensively, first thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create leverage so that I can call a play to where I'll have numbers at the point of attack. I learned that under Paul Morrow. When I came in, and I'm being 100% honest, when he interviewed me to be the offensive coordinator, I'm coming in with Mike Leach air raid stuff because I was sold on it. I still am sold on it, but the first question he asked when I came with 30 different formations and about 150 plays, he was like, "How are we going to install all that in a year?" And I didn't have an answer for it. And so after that, he started teaching me about, "Hey, man, let me show you how to break down film properly." And even though Paul Morrow was, he was never technology, he wasn't technically sound as far as huddle, but I got the chance to learn how to break down film like how they did in the 80s and the 90s. And so that kind of taught me, how to do it, without some of the, some of the analytic stuff and software that it comes easy now to us. So first thing I'm going to do is if I see defenses, I'm going to go and break down every position to find tendency. And then I'm going to try to find tendency as a whole. Once I think I found it, then I'm going to develop formations to exploit that tendency. And then I'm going to also check out down and distance as well and see what those coaches are calling on down and distance, what type of blitzes or stunts they call in certain situations. I want to ensure that when I call a run play or a pass play that I have the numbers at the point of attack. If I do, then now I want to see is how did the defense react when they didn't have numbers on the attack, and did it create explosive plays? If it did create explosive plays, then let's chart what those explosive plays are and see if we have something similar in our offensive playbook. If we do, yes, congratulations. Now we're going to mask it with a different formation because we know that good D coordinators, they're not going to get stung week to week on the same stuff twice. You know what I mean? So we might see that, they're susceptible to, the out fade package. And we might run an out fade package, you know what I mean, as far as our quick game or out more package, depending on if you call the fade mandatory outside release. We might do something like that, and we might mask it instead of a trips package. We might put it in a tray stat package with a buck sweep going to the opposite side to the boundary. So, it's those things that I think a good offensive coordinator will look for. I was lucky enough to have one. And then I think with my experience, as well, we utilize some AI software as well. But, I think with both of me and Daniel's experiences, we're able to find, for the most part, tendency. And then it just became the practice and execution.
Like I said, Coach, one of the things that I think you guys did is you had the ability to have a lot of elements spreading out the play and getting your pass game going, but also created a lot of three-man surfaces, made it very difficult to align, and like you're talking about, created a leverage with a lot of those formations. So we're gonna start switch it up here a little bit. I know you've done some work with some Glazier Clinic type stuff. Obviously, a ton of offensive experience, but also I was always very impressed with you guys defensively. You did a good job mixing fronts and different things of that nature. But let me ask you here. We're going to talk a little 4-2-5 because you guys ran some 4-2-5 at Vista Grande and did a very good job. I was always impressed with your defensive linemen, seem very fundamentally sound. You've talked about some of those guys that are moving on to bigger opportunities there. So I'm going to pop over to Huddle here. And if you want to kind of walk us through the basics of how you guys went about installing your 4-2-5, maybe talk some coverage stuff and some front things, different adjustments, anything you're willing to share, we'd certainly love to hear it. So I'm going to share my screen here over to Huddle, and you can kind of walk us through some of this stuff from a 4-2-5 perspective.
Okay. Yeah, no, so we ran, I know with the advent of, a lot of people are running spread systems, whether they're, I like to call it two different eras, man. You got the Mike Leach, Hal Mum type systems. You got the variations off of that. With me, I like to do a lot of spread stuff. My background was wing T, so I enjoy seeing a lot of the spread wing T stuff that you saw with Urban Meyer at Florida. Implement some of the new air raid passing concepts that you will see, in the early 2000s and upwards to, the mid, 2010s and 2013s. We did a lot of that. And so, with that, a lot of times you saw teams, they try to develop that hybrid safety that could go into the box so they wouldn't get caught on the passing. A lot of times, man, in high school, unless you got somebody that's extremely talented, it's hard to find a true kid that could play nose. And so that zero technique, that's the diamond in the rough. If you have one in your high school, treat them guys right because it gives you the ability to go with an odd front. We didn't really have one until our last year. And so for, our first, 4 years, with my D coordinator, I told him, my favorite defense overall is a 3-3-5 because when I played college, I played under Rocky Long at New Mexico, and he was one of the innovators of the 3-3-5. But when we got here at Vista, we wanted to go with an even front, and we wanted to keep it extremely basic because we were trying to build from the ground up. And so one of the things that we really caught up to on the front was we were going to have settings or different calls based upon the penetration levels we wanted for our defense. And so, yeah, we were a gap control team, and everybody had their assigned gaps. But, we might have, the D linemen were taught to be aware of down and distance and to receive a call from the defensive line coach on how much penetration or what type of stunt we were going to do, whether it was a tackle stunt, a linebacker tackle stunt, ET stunt, etc. We had those in our packages when we ran zone blitzes. But the majority of the time, man, we were trying to take, because you're facing all these spread teams, we're trying to get 1 to 2 yards of penetration, and we're holding and reading and trying to meet that running back in the hole, try to slow him up. That was extremely difficult year 1 and year 2 with kids that hadn't played football before, because whether it was first down and 10 or 4th and 10, those kids were coming off the ball and they were, they're rushing it like it's a pass. And so we played teams like, Canyon View my first year. All they did was they ran outside zone. They just sweeped us to death, and and they washed us out. And so for the last 3 years, and it kind of came together. We had a transfer from Hamilton, Nehemiah Dixon, who could play that one tech when we were in the even front, but we also put him in some odd stuff too. When we went on 3-4, it allowed us to do some of the stunts that we did, and it allowed us to get Atheon Errol, our defensive end, get him loose. But, teaching kids to be aggressive is a hard thing at first, but then teaching them to be aware of the down and distance while maintaining that aggression, in a small town is altogether difficult as well. So my coaches, I put my hat off to them. Coach Angel Ortega, my D coordinator, Coach Hawk, Joe Hawkins, my defensive line coach at the time, Coach Chris Abercrombie, my linebackers coach. They spent hours and hours and hours of teaching just in the classroom and going on the field, teaching our kids how to be, more aware of what's going on to raise that football IQ, if that makes sense. I know I said a lot.
Absolutely, it does, Coach. Let me ask you this, because I've noticed that you guys did blend some 3-3 and 4-2. I really think there's a lot of similarities. I think you got your 6-box players, you got your force players kind of out here, similar things you can do coverage wise. What do you think are some of the similarities between the 4-2-5 and the 3-3-5? And what do you think are some of the biggest differences? You alluded to it a little bit with discussing really feeling like you have to have that zero technique nose, but elaborate a little bit on those two defenses, differences and similarities.
Well, I think in a 4-2-5, it gives, if you can develop a talented enough base. We saw it when the Giants won the Super Bowl, when they came down to Phoenix and won the Super Bowl. If you get a talented rush with 4, you really don't need to send too much. You can get creative in sending 5. But when you start talking about odd fronts, I think you have to be creative in how you send 5, and then you got to be doubly creative in how you send 6. Because if you start to face teams that have good offensive coordinators that teach their quarterbacks how to put themselves in the right protections, as well as have a running back that knows how to help and supplement those protections, if you're not creative in how you send 5, if you play a guy with a wing tee background like myself and you're going to let my guards go loose, then I think it's goodbye. You know what I mean? Because either we're going to try to get the edge, we're going to sweep, to counter, to trap, or we're going to kick you out on a traditional buck sweep and go underneath you. The battle for the B gap, I believe, and you're hearing more from an offensive side, but the battle for the B gap is critical if I know where you're coming from. So when you get an odd front, I believe you've got to get creative in how you send blitz. Doesn't mean you got to blitz all the time. Is that you got to make that offensive coordinator work at night to make sure that he knows where you're coming from. Because if you don't get creative in how you're going to send 5 and 6 on an odd front, then I think when you're leaving guards uncovered, you're asking for problems.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I haven't really thought of it that way, but I think I see where you're coming from there, and I definitely agree with a lot of the sentiment there. Very interesting point of view on that, Coach. You're talking about these defensive linemen having different calls based on the situation. I worked with Don Kramer, who was a longtime defensive coordinator for Jesse Parker, actually, in the Mountain View Toro days, and we had a similar call when these guys didn't have to worry about closing it down, as I can still hear Coach Kramer saying, or squeezing the down block and those type of things. Are these guys consistently kind of being told to be spilled players? Do you have them being forced players when they get a call to rush the passer? They not having to worry about that? Because that's something I think you really have to coach with your defensive linemen. It's very difficult.
So like when we would turn our guys loose, we had a call when we were turning the guys loose on second and long or maybe third and long situations. They still had to maintain gap responsibility and lane responsibility. So, we unless we were calling a stunt or anything like that, when we turned them loose, especially like our ends, Atheon, I adopted Atheon in high school. So a lot of times he's still trying to work outside half man because we still don't want to get out leveraged on anything that might be misdirection or coming his way. If that makes sense, sometimes we would give him the 100% go ahead. If it's like a 3rd and 18, he can work an outside to inside move to get in there. But the majority of the time, man, we're still keeping responsibility because we don't want to get out leveraged and give up a big play with any type of misdirection or slip screen, etc. As a matter of fact, we really studied the front and how they was going. I wish I had it up, but I don't have access to Vista Grande's huddle anymore, But if you look on that Arcadia game when we played Arcadia, one of the biggest plays of the night was our nose guard, Nehemiah Dixon, who was actually playing, he might have been playing a 1 tech at that time. He read that they were going to do a running back slip, and he actually read it correctly, and he ended up making an interception on that play to seal the game for us. So, yeah, we couldn't have done that year 1 if we didn't take the time to slow our kids down. And to be honest, year 1 and year 2, we couldn't do a lot of stunts, Coach. Like, we just couldn't. We didn't have the kids that had the football IQ to do that. You know what I mean? We spend a lot of time working our stunts and everything in spring and in the summer. And then after that, we might do, during a defensive blitz period, we might do our stunting maybe once a week. But like most coaches, man, what we show in week 1 we're trying to save our good stuff for the games that we think are going to be the most trouble for us, and as well as the games that are going to mean a lot for us. Because I remember, when I was calling my first game for Coach Morrow, we ran a couple trick plays, and I was excited, and I thought I was going to get a pat on the back. I did, but it was a better way of him saying, he was like, you won't be able to run that against the world, and you won't be able to have that in the playoffs. And at the time, I never thought about it like that. And so we kind of teach our both of our coordinators. We both came with the mindset that what we showed in week one would not be what we would try to show at the end of the season or in the playoffs. We were going to try to show a new look, at least one new look every game, to kind of keep guys working on the other side.
I love hearing stuff like that because I think that's something that I definitely probably could have done a better job of. Sometimes you got to save a few of those bullets for when you really need them.
100%.
So that's an interesting point of view there on that Coach Morrow shared there. I'm going to hop over here and I appreciate you talking to us today. Last kind of question we're going to talk about that I think is really interesting in terms of you've built these programs and done a really good job. What do you think are some of the most important positions that you have to fill on your staff?
I think now, more than ever, I think you need to have quality guys and this is probably I don't know if I'm brand new to the Arizona coaching community as far as a head coach. And so what I'm about to say, it could be perceived as controversial, but I don't necessarily need a coach that has extensive amounts of football experience. If he does, that is perfect. But if he's willing to clinic, read, learn, he's great with the kids. You know what I mean? He's a young man or young woman of high character, and they're always going to be there for your kids. I found that is better for turning around a program than a guy with he throws 100,000 yards, college football experience, offense is on fire, defensive juggernaut, has 4 or 5 rings, and he doesn't have the temperament because he's won so much. He's kind of forgotten what it's all about, if that makes sense. I've been blessed at Vista to have that type of guys. And that's why I believe that we won more than what we lost, was because I had those types of guys. Not just guys that are going to teach football, but guys that are going to be high character guys as well. Because a lot of the kids that I coach, especially now that I'm at Mountain Pointe, these guys are looking for male mentorship, and they're looking for high character guys. And what we might perceive as a troubled youth isn't a troubled youth. They just want somebody that's really going to be there for them and be consistent so they can rely upon that person. Because, at Mountain Pointe, I'll just say, I've already had 2 or 3 kids that came up to me, hey, coach, you know how to tie a tie? Because they're getting invited to certain banquets and certain functions because they're highly recruited kids, and they don't know how to do these things, and it's just mom at the house. We had a similar type of kid at Vista Grande just without the accolades, if that makes sense. So I need those types of guys. I'm a high faith guy. So, depending on, the religious tolerance of where I'm at, professionally, I love to have guys that are spiritual, and have, good religious beliefs along with their character, regardless of what it is. You know what I mean? And I feel when you start to build a staff like that, you will get some resistance from the kids. But once the kids know that you're not going anywhere and that they can rely upon you, that's when the light bulb hits and they'll give you everything they got.
Coach, that's one of the things I like most about you is you're not afraid. Don't shy away from talking about your faith, and I love that. I feel the same way. So I really enjoy hearing that. And I couldn't agree with you more, Coach. I think when those kids know that that consistency is critical. If there's not, particularly if there's not a lot of consistency in their home situation, I've found in a lot of cases those kids appreciate the consistency they get at school and in football and in your program and different stuff like that. Obviously, Coach, we touched on a ton of subjects here, so I want to thank you for giving us everything you did there, and please make sure to stay in touch. We'll see you this summer. I'm looking forward to seeing your guys in 7-on-7. Take it a little easy on us. We're still going to be developing. We're going to be replacing a few guys, but I'll always look forward to see your teams, and I know Mountain Pointe will be in good hands with you at the helm, and I'm looking forward to watching you continue to build that program. So thank you so much for joining us, Coach, and I wish you the best of luck moving forward.
Thank you, Coach Collette. You know, you're one of my friends, and I consider you a brother. And so, to me, man, the ability to come up there, you know, us get to see you, get to get some of that good mountain air. I've always had the highest respect for the mountain schools because of my mentor, Paul Morrow. You know, mountain kids have a certain toughness to them where they don't need the numbers, man. What they're gonna give you in the first quarter is exactly what they're gonna give you to the final second. And so, there's an admiration and a high level of respect for mountain schools. And so, last year we lost to you twice, but I didn't want to lose anybody else but you, man. So if you need anything, from me, feel free to reach out. You got a brother in me. Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, Coach. I appreciate it. I'll be, like I said, looking forward to following the Pride and wish you guys all the best. And I'm really excited to see Mountain Pointe in 5A this year. I know you guys are going to do some great things. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time for another edition of the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show.